Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure you've had a great conference so far. Fourth day, end of the fourth day, and the excitement continues this afternoon with live debate. I've got some great colleagues with me to discuss the whole issue around online, face-to-face, or blended. I've had to just count backwards from 10, which was a bit of a challenge for me. So as I recover from that, a few other pointers. There's a chat panel on the side of the screen, and if you use that for any comments or thoughts you want to put in, a number of us will keep an eye on that and try and bring that into the debate. And this is really just a sort of views from a range of people who are deeply involved in the FE and apprenticeship sector in different ways, and obviously have a lot of experience of face-to-face and online. So I spoke in the conference on the main platform about sort of the importance of digital and all the benefits that digital can bring, and we've had a range of workshops during the week around functional skills and how you can deliver and assess that online, and the initial assessments, a whole range of initial assessments including cognitive and functional skills and mental toughness, and also using digital learning, digital platforms in apprenticeships. So, you know, already we've covered a range of things in terms of opportunity, and it's something the digital delivery has been a real passion of mine over what's incredibly almost 30-year career now in this sector. There is so much possible now. It's never been like this in terms of the technology, the cloud and everything else enabling this to happen. And just as a reminder, I think, to kick this off, that it doesn't matter what type of learning we're doing and in what environment, there are some fundamentals that we all know, that individualization of learning, that engagement, that motivation, that access to learning, the quality of the experience, and also the ability to have the data to monitor the student, the teachers, the performance overall. All of that's really important. It doesn't matter whether it's online, classroom, or anywhere else. So, you know, when we're thinking about what works and what doesn't work, those are some of the fundamental things we should be measuring against. So that's sort of a brief introduction. You've got a range of experts sitting with us today. What I suggest is when they first speak in response to something, they can just introduce themselves at that point, rather than going around the table initially, just who they are, where they're from, and what they do. And I suppose I was going to throw open the first question in this discussion around, you know, we've obviously had 12 months plus now experience of just a totally different world, and a lot of lockdowns to deal with. A lot of people have been trying to go online. So I suppose my first question was, what have been the biggest barriers in a way going online? Phil, maybe if you want to start, and others chip in.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I'm Phil Stiddle from my Suffolk College. Look after apprenticeship recruitment and everything connected to employers throughout the college. I think, yeah, it's a good question. We've had a massive shift from day one, you know, March this time last year, where the whole college for us, we had to become remote and online. So that's not only staff getting set up, but that's students getting set up as well. We live in a very remote area. Connectivity's sometimes an issue for us, so that's the first hurdle that we've had to get over. One, you know, kitting learners to ensure that they can access study time, but two, also connectivity. So how can we get over that hurdle? We've been pushing hard with our local chambers to ensure that actually, you know, Wi-Fi black spots and broadband black spots are really tackled and taken on board, and that's gone all the way down to Parliament, which is great. But other areas of the country, I think, suffer similarly with us. We've had a great response, and actually, you know, over this last 12 months, the level of student interaction and attendance has been on par with where it would be on a face-to-face version. And actually, coming out the other side, we have adapted our model where we will be continuing some online delivery. and some face to face. And I think it goes back to your point, Mark, that it needs to be the correct method for the individual or for the cohort, and the flexibility of choice, I think, is the key part for me, how we can, you know, take this forward.
Okay, thanks. And Pete, it's not quite as rural in Stoke, I don't think. So what are the challenges you've been seeing?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think initially there were a number of challenges. I think the key one was who had access to the internet. A number of our learners, even though we are not rural, we live in an area where internet access is difficult for a percentage of our learners. So we overcome that quite quickly. We had to make sure that the learners had the necessary hardware, and we did a great exercise in providing our learners with laptops. I think one of the key things that worked for us is that we already had some well-established relationships with learning platform providers such as Skills Network, Cognassist and Mindful, and that helps us to hit the ground running. And I think that what we have on the back of that is some very collaborative awarding organisations, CMI, TQ UK, just to name just a couple of us. So we were able to hit the ground running from that perspective. I think what we've recognised quite quickly after we took the focus off the students, not entirely obviously, is that some of our lecturers and assessors had some real challenges in terms of, certainly in the early stages of lockdown, actually delivering from home, and the access that they had in terms of their own houses, in terms of having the right equipment at hand, and also having the availability in terms of room space. So we had some early challenges there, but overall, I think that it's worked well for us. I think that if I look at where we are moving forward, my overall responsibilities are specifically for external relationships and apprenticeships. And my own experience back when I was studying with the Open Business School is that I had great interaction with peers from other organisations. I remember at one of my first residential schools, I was sat between the Deputy Chief Constable of the RUC and a main board director from ICI. One of the key things I've taken from that is how important it is to have a community learning experience. So for me, I think that moving forward, what I would like is for a further collaboration between platform providers, awarding organisations and educational establishments, so that we can pick up micro and help to facilitate micro communities of learners that can start a learner journey together, and they are there in an informal basis to support each other. And whether we look to use something like LinkedIn or Facebook to do that, or whether organisations can develop their own platforms. But I think in terms of online learning, that interaction between learners still needs to continue. And I think we need to do more work in that area as we move forward.
Okay, so interaction is a bit one of the things that's missing in terms of that. It's almost that informal learning going on in the background and supporting each other and stuff. So Lester, your experience, and one of the comments already has been around online delivery is much slower, so extra sessions are needed. I don't know if I've heard that before, but so your experience, and what do you think about that comment?
Yeah, so Lester Biddle, and I'm the technology director at HIT Training. So I don't think it has been slower personally. I mean, we were quite fortunate that we were supposedly already ahead of the learning curve, or the online curve, when the pandemic hit. We'd already started to sort of make some moves towards online delivery and making the training interactive and engaging. I think in terms of speed of delivery in relation to what you're asking now, we found that in the main, you know, if people are able to pace the learning at their own speed, and also go back and revisit the learning that they need to, if the sessions are recorded, or they can access it at other times as well, so they can do some refreshing there. So I think for them, the speed of learning actually is somewhat quicker, because people are, you know, they're more focused as long as they've got that discipline. What we did find in the early days was when we were thrown, all of us were thrown into this situation back in March. Many of us, including staff and learners, were in environments that weren't conducive for learning. So barking dogs and screaming children around you, And when things like that started to get a little bit more settled and resolved, and people could focus, I think that's the key thing for us. Is it's about, if you're going to do something online, you really do have to be disciplined with your environment around you, switching off other devices, turning off your other notifications, because distraction is what would slow you down now, I believe, and that's what I would say. Okay, thanks. Now, James, because I think you just feed your children sweets to keep them away from the camera when you're online. So, I mean, this whole thing about changing environment, having to, for the teachers, changing their home environment. I mean, do you think it's going to stick now, in a sense that now people have set themselves up, then maybe they will be keener to work from home rather than traveling around the country if it's apprenticeships?
Yeah, hi everybody, James Earl, Executive Director at the Skills Network. Yeah, it's an interesting one, really. I think whatever the new normal looks like, I absolutely think some people have embraced it and embraced home working and embraced the systems and technology in front of them, and absolutely, I think that it's here to stay. We'll get back to, I guess, back to the question of the challenges of the last 12 months. I mean, what we've got here is some great people who are perhaps early adopters of learning technology and learning content, and it's made it, if I'm not wrong, not easy, but easier to transition to that online delivery mechanism. I think one of the major challenges we've seen as an organisation, talking to varying different independent training providers, is probably the speed of change that was actually needed. Maybe the lack of digital strategies that people had on board. 15 months or 12 months or however long it's been, it felt like 12 years, but let's not forget 12, 13 months ago, learning technology was relatively challenging to get into the marketplace as a lead. It's now at the forefront of people's minds and forefront of digital strategy. So I think even the early adopters found it challenging to maybe adapt e-learning systems across various provisions. But I do actually think it's here to stay, because the technology has already been there, and it's going to be even more advanced in the years ahead, really.
Okay, so Chris, we're starting to get a few comments around engagement with the learner, and disengaged learners is very hard to engage with online. Also, getting them involved during the learning, and I think there are two views, aren't there? That in some senses, those that in the physical environment are confident are always sort of contributing. Those that are shy are actually online. Sometimes it gives them more chance to contribute if they're not sort of being exposed to all their colleagues, so to speak. Do you have any thoughts about that? And also, it'd be interesting to hear your experience the last 12 months. Obviously, what the services you're providing, the support you're providing, are for some of those more those learners that are more sort of challenged in a sense. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Chris Quickfall, Chief Executive of Cognassist. I think it's really interesting you're talking about the points of it. I think ultimately we're saying we can't control the environment that the learners are in, whereas before, pre-pandemic, colleges, institutions, in a lot of situations, that environment was a lot more controlled. So we're seeing bark and dog screaming kids. What that's meant is that when any big disturbances go on, we have this thing called cognitive shifting, where the brain's process and shifts into another activity, and that's a subconscious act. So subconscious is shifting, and positively conscious is called tasking. So somebody could also be on WhatsApp, Snapchat, or something like that, whilst at the same time the teaching is going on. And both those tasks are one of the most inhibitive to learning and affecting any sorts of training. So education institutions have lost the ability to control that so well. So I think getting that across to learners, that they have to have that cleaner, softer, safer from distractions environment, is really important towards learning. You've seen we work with and support learners who might find some tasks more challenging to undertake than other learners. But it's not all negative, this shift onto online, because some individuals have far stronger verbal comprehension than they do visual perception. And what that means is that in a classroom-based activity or somewhere where you could sit in front of the learner, there's a lot of body language, there's a lot of communication that occurs that's non-verbal. And somebody might be able to see that quite and learn from it a lot. But that's taken away from us in these online environments. Actually, hardly anyone can see anybody's hands here. So we've lost a lot of communication. And learners that benefited a lot from having verbal are going to be able to take advantage of this situation. So we're going to see pros and cons, and we're going to see learners that could perform well not having coping strategies that perform in this new environment, and vice versa.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chris. I think but also for me, it's also about what do we mean by e-learning? Because we don't necessarily mean just replacement of a face-to-face classroom session with the live classroom sessions that we're doing now. It's around actually how people can adapt and change with the likes of e-learning content, whether that's the creation of their own, whether that's off the shelf, and how they can blend that up to create even more of a potentially an exciting delivery mechanism for students. And that's the really important one to kind of highlight today. It's not just about, and we're not just talking about, can people sit at home delivering their sessions? It's actually the art of the possible of all the different ways in which you can use technology to deliver.
So we've had a comment in from Karen around it's a more efficient and effective way of delivering, but also a blended approach, that is, but also sometimes there needs to be a choice. As soon as I hear choice, I don't hear efficiency, because you end up doing both. So I mean, Lester, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I'm sure, given being a national provider, you've probably seen some of the benefits and the challenges around that shift.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. It is about choice. It's about giving the learner, learner-centric learning about how they like to learn. One size doesn't fit all. And we have to appreciate that different people do learn in different ways and engage in things in different ways and methods. I think that point you make, Mark, is very prevalent, though, about making sure that it's not duplicated so it becomes less efficient. So, we've had to make sure that and look carefully at curriculum and design and make sure that whatever is being delivered online, as it were, wouldn't be also duplicated up in a face-to-face setting, and allowing people to think about that. It's looking at saying, right, what efficiently can you deliver online? What lends itself online and what doesn't? I mean, one of our challenges, for example, we do quite a lot of sort of like food-related culinary skills, and part of the art of that is actually smelling the aroma of the cooking and smelling the products and stuff. And to my knowledge, yet we haven't got any technology that can replicate efficient and effective smells. So yeah, that's for me what that would be about.
So that and that sort of fits this question of what's appropriate online, what isn't appropriate online, and it's going to vary because of all sorts of criteria. There's obviously, like you've described, the type of teaching and learning that's going on. There's also the level of the learner, I think, as well, and how easy it is to engage them online. And Pete, have you got a view on, the sorts of things that you would be looking at when determining, yeah, that would be really good to do online, but that probably is more challenging?
I think there are a couple of areas there, Mark. I think one of the questions that we ask ourselves is how easy, when a learner is doing online activity, are we able to measure the learner journey? Where is the learner on that journey? The other area as well is it isn't one fit for all. So we keep talking about e-learning, but should that replace physical paper? Should it replace PDFs? And I think that for all learners, I don't think that there's just one choice. I think there should be a flexible choice for individuals to choose whether they do two of them together. I'm not sure whether I buy into the efficiency piece. I think it's about outputs and impact. What impacts are we having through e-learning? It isn't, for me, a key measure in and around efficiency is, are we getting the outputs at the end of the program, the course, the certification that we're looking for, and are we able to support the learners equally? I think that when you are trying to take learners on a journey together, sometimes those that are finding it most difficult are the ones that can get left behind, and they're the ones that potentially need additional support. So I think that that's whereby additional activities that work in tandem or in parallel with the learning need to take place. And those activities are support activities, just touchdowns with the learners. How are you finding the online learning? How are you finding the activities? Are you coping working from home? Is there any additional support that you would need? And those are the kind of conversations that would happen quite freely within a college environment, but we need to make sure that those conversations continue and that support mechanism is there for our learners, regardless of whether they're in the college or learning at a distance from home or another location.
So that's sounds like a sort of total change in terms of the whole almost pedagogy delivery. You sort of have to step back and start again and look at, right, what resource can be online, actually what sort of professional do I need supporting the learner at the different stages. It's not the old model. Phil, do you have any thoughts around this and the types of students and all of that?
You're totally right. I think it is a total step back. Have a look again. How do we use technology? How do we look at the time of learning? Because actually, you know, in this format, if a lot was online, the catch-up availability from reviewing videos and recordings is much better than it ever was. Because if you missed a session, here you go, have a handout, do it yourself, or we can support you in a certain way to do it and catch up. But actually, this gives that freedom to work, I suppose, a bit when you want to work. Maybe it could be later in the evenings if you're more of a night owl. Actually, it gives, as long as the individual is driven, that's the key part, and driven to know that they've got support from institutions like ourselves, staff like ourselves, actually they will succeed. And you're right, it's a full blend, because nothing takes away from the senses. So the senses of learning within a carpentry workshop or an engineering workshop, you're not going to take that away. You still need those practical skills. You still need to understand how metal bends and how, you know, a saw works. You've got to understand that point of view from a practical period, and that's got to still happen. And what will happen though is the theory behind that. The theory, yeah, can be taught online, and it can be taught through a session or through learning when the choice of the student happens. So I think there is a full blend there.
So just, I mean, on that, you know, and a lot more of our resources video based, and possibly just jumping back to Leicester for a minute, you were describing smell, but there's a lot you can do with video, isn't there, in terms of showing different scenarios and have world experts rather than, you know, the chef down the road sort of thing. So because there's been some comments about, you know, it's easy to do business type courses but not necessarily construction engineering, things like that. But actually with video and I'm sure with virtual reality more, you can start adding some real interesting stuff, can't you?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, you know, the consumption, I think, of learning is changing as well. The way that we all like to watch, for example, these little short clips of videos speeded up, you know, somebody making a fantastic dish in seconds. I wish it only did take seconds in reality, but we're whizzing through that, showing people how quickly it can be made. I think, as you say as well, it is about that expertise that you can tap into, you know, even worldwide. There's no reason why now you can't produce those short videos. I think the videos have to be short, sharp, and to the point, and also if they've got some sort of degree of interaction as well, so that they become interactive and engaging as well, then that's the thing. And also now people are consuming their learning, you know, on mobile devices. I mean, I think, you know, 82% of the population now have a smartphone and 72% are on 4G connectivity. So you know, people are consuming learning on the way to work, on the bus, on the train, and we've got to accommodate and be ready for that as well.
There's clearly, yeah, Chris, I'll come to you. I was just going to say, on the mobile side of things, you know, there's a generation thing here as well, and a nation thing. I was talking about Africa the other day, and that's their sole sort of access. And I was just looking. I've got two screens in front of me, 4 bits of paper, a pen, and a highlighter. So I'm sort of spanning the the decades in a way. Chris, coming to you, and please do make your comment, but also I'm quite interested in, you know, you have taken something that's been very traditionally face-to-face, and I think a lot of the community in the world that you work in would challenge whether it could be done online. So you must have faced a lot of criticism around that and had to prove that it is actually better online in many cases.
Yeah, Mark, you're exactly correct. There's a cohort, it's circa 50-50 on the within neuroscientist, educational psychologist realms, where they say no, it has to be done paper-based, and you've got to have somebody sitting in front of you. And then you've got another cohort that's actually, there's a lot of advances you can do with technology that make that experience better, and that allow us to get stronger data out of the back of it. There's more consistency as well, because it's a computer delivering rather than a human. So we face that a lot. One of the benefits we're able to do is there's a psychometric component to all cognitive assessments, which is effectively mathematical modeling of behavior. And what we're able to do is use the mathematical modeling to demonstrate the effectiveness there. And which sort of takes us on to the point I was going to raise, what Lester was saying, and I think you were echoing it, Mark, that with digital content, you can put an expert in the palm of somebody's hand, a global expert. And I think what we've seen now with colleges moving into a lot better, more significant of a digital footprint, you've got, if you get really good learning experience platforms with very strong content on top of it, and I've seen TSN's platform, and I've seen your content, which I think is very good. We can deliver a lot of that information to that individual very, very efficiently. And a very good LXP can allow more interactions to occur with other learners. Your system does that very well. And those interactions are cognitively, we're doing this thing called rehearsing, which is repetition. That turns that information into knowledge. And then you can put a good educator in front of that individual who's going to turn that knowledge into wisdom. And I think that's that information, knowledge, data, information, knowledge, wisdom pyramid is something that can be done very effectively if you're blending it with technology and people, as long as you've got the right technology.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So, Phil, I always joked when I started as principal at Oaklands College, I went to the engineering, the electrical block actually, and there were rows of filing cabinets, and each lecturer had their key, and they locked their acetate away every evening so none of the other lecturers could get hold of it. And that was within one college. Do you think the culture of sharing is changing? And my second question, and I'll come to Pete as well, who seems to be, I think, has touched a nerve there. And there's the second question was around, surely don't the lecturers see that by having this e-learning content, which takes away the time for, they don't have to do that delivery. They can actually focus their time on supporting the individual learners. Surely that's a massive benefit. We have learners that fly through their programs, barely need any support whatsoever, and others that need lots, but it averages out. So we know that, generally there's the same sort of cost overall to supporting all the learners. So Phil, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're totally right, Mark. The wealth of information, videos that's out there at the moment, actually, you can build such a good delivery model, such a good delivery package for the learners. Actually, you're right. The time that you would normally spend writing that or developing that can be lower. Therefore, yeah, you certainly can look at how you can support individuals, see how people are performing, and set a strategy. I mean, Google Classrooms and other platforms to set fantastic sort of preferences around what you watch and what you can do in that class. And actually, you could ask a learner to look at 4 videos. They don't all have to look at the first one at the same time. They can look at different ones as you go through, and that way you can spread your time, you can spread your support. And yeah, gone are the days of locking the acetates in the cabinet, I think. And the speed of how the world is changing, we have to rely on the technology through video, through YouTube and everything else that is out there.
Yeah. So Pete, the culture of sharing.
Yeah, I think at Stoke College we've certainly had some challenges in that area in terms of assessors, tutors sharing expertise and materials. And I think we're going through a process of re-education. I think there's some great endpoint assessment awarding organisations out there that have got and developed some fantastic materials. We know there's some great platform providers that have got online content that we can use. So it's moving away from the old and then moving towards what's freely accessible. And also that instant gratification piece that I think we're touching on to a degree. I was in a conversation with somebody the other evening about the Super League, which died very quickly. But I think the idea of that was that the new generation that's coming through, they want things instantly. They don't want to wait. And I think that it's quite interesting that certainly when I was at school, and perhaps for the majority of the people on this platform today, will have been in 1 hour classes. And that's stuck with us for decades and decades. But the generation that are coming through, is 1 hour too long? Do they want things in shorter periods? Is it a 15-minute learning experience? They want a 30-minute learning experience. And I think that the research that's done is showing that the new generation have a shorter attention span, have a shorter concentration span, because they're able to access material more immediately through mobile devices. So they expect what they want in a much shorter space of time. So I think it comes back to not only are we trying to access materials that are available to us, but access materials that are delivered in a different way, in a different space. And I think that that's what the learners of today are looking for.
Right, so James, there's been a comment in around stretch and challenge. I'm sure you'd like to pick that one up.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was typing away actually, but yeah, I'll pick it up on here indeed. I think that, yeah, look, absolutely right. And you mentioned that our learners fly through our program. That might be a standardized program. That's where technology comes in to the use of what we do in terms of the skills networks. We've got a specific diagnostic tool. So absolutely every learner has got a different ability, and we use a diagnostic tool to diagnose what the learner's ability is. Therefore, some learners might fly through the standardized program. So absolutely, but that identifies a need to then give them the additional content to stretch and challenge. So thanks, Sarah, for that question. But yeah, it's another example from our point of view where we do use technology to actually identify different learner needs, whether they need more support or seemingly an additional challenge to the program that they're put on.
Yeah, and Craig's commented again. A lot of these comments is sort of on the one hand positive, on the other hand negative, which is, I suppose, is why we've got a round table debate, isn't it? But this comment that there is definitely digital exclusion. You know, no one denies that, and we've heard whether it's connectivity, whether it's literally have they got the equipment. I was listening to a head teacher the other day who was saying actually it's not even that, it's the environment they're sitting in. Even if they have got the equipment, it's not a suitable learning environment. We're talking that a bit about teachers as well. So do you see a way through that? I mean, obviously tech will keep developing, and I'm sure more rural areas will be reached by satellite or whatever, but we're talking, let's say, the next 5 years. How do we overcome some of those barriers? Because otherwise, are we not going to see an even bigger digital divide, in the sense that those that have access actually have access to some of this amazing stuff we're talking about, and those that don't are sort of shunted even further away? Phil, do you want to start with that one, and then I'll come to Chris?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very valid point. The collective, obviously, the reach, as you say, broadband reach across the country, that's continuing to improve and needs to continue to improve. I know the government are pushing hard on support for laptops in schools and so forth. Great, absolutely brilliant. What we might well come to, though, is how we use our institutions and the larger spaces that we have. How do we make those into a gathering for all, a place for all, doesn't depend on the learner. So it doesn't mean you have to go to a class room per se. It could be a larger space where you come in, you pick up a laptop, you then learn individually. If that is that flexible route. I was speaking to my daughter and her friend. They said, wouldn't it be great if I could choose my lesson today? Because I really love English. I'd love to do that first. Instead, I've got it last thing on a Friday. So I just thought, actually, how difficult is it to change that going forward? If you had that peer support available, if you had the content, actually they could choose when they did the lessons or the study of a certain topic. So I think that the connectivity part, it may be a way of us communitizing things in terms of coming together using larger spaces. But again, the government needs to continue that push on broadband connectivity and getting to the populace that don't have IT equipment and connect.
Chris, any thoughts on that? And then James.
Yes, I was just listening to Phil speak there, and I was made us think. I'm going to talk about what I see as the future in the next 10 years. So before this decade is out, I think you're going to be facing a classroom of kids. Those kids are going to have AR glasses on, and they might be doing the speed of light. And Einstein's going to walk into the class, and there's going to be a sun over there, and there's going to be a photon that comes out of the sun, and Einstein's going to start delivering his lesson on the speed of light to the class. So that lesson is a one-to-many. So there's not a lot of adaptions we can deliver in that content delivery. But all of those kids will have had diagnostic assessments done. So there'll be skills assessments, functional assessments, cognitive assessments. That data set will be relayed into the content provider. In that, the one-to-many, you can adapt it a little. But then Einstein will say, pick up your iPads. And now we're going to go into a deeper bit about the speed of light. All the kids will come out from that 30-minute session on their iPad with exactly the same learning outcomes. But the journey they went through to get to that point will be different for each and every child. Because we've done the assessment, we understand how to deliver the information at what pace and at what structure. And that'll be there within 10 years. I'm putting money on that before the decade is out. That's how things are going to be delivered. Going back to the point on will everybody be able to have that type of technology? Will we still have some disparity in inequality there? I would be surprised if we don't continue on this path, where there's some haves and some have-nots. But that's what the future is going to look like in 10 years. And I'm taking Peter's point about how their college was able to adapt to this change faster. It's because they were a lot more digitally astute in that digital infrastructure there. Those education institutions that aren't already encoding digital into their being are already way behind, I think. Okay.
Well, there's the future for you. So go and buy the shares in the relevant companies, and I mean, it's accelerating, isn't it? Technology the change is accelerating so much as well. James, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm not sure how I follow up to Einstein walking in the classroom, but I'll give it a go. It's a really good point, Chris. I think mine's probably two case in points. One that Phil has suggested, and it's gone on the chat as well, is one about access to learning. Now, it's not, and we mentioned that it's not necessarily great in terms of a home environment, so we can give people laptops, but I think that what there does need to be is more centralised government funding, more localised funding, so people have got access not only to laptops but into the infrastructure in and around the community. So if the home's not the right environment to work in, then they've got a walk-in area with more infrastructure. So that's a challenge around funding, and also looking at the colleges and the ITPs around their investment in their infrastructure and making sure there's absolutely more concentration put on ensuring every single student has access to that. And I guess the next one, and I think Craig probably puts it in his point, is the resistance from a teaching point of view. And you have to probably strip that all the way back to embedding digital pedagogy into the qualifications of teachers and how to deliver online and the best way to deliver online. And I think that's where we need to start, really, and probably agree over the next 10 years. We really need to look back at the people that are teaching online and embed it in so it becomes part of the philosophy going forward. But yeah, learning technology is here to stay. That's absolutely the point.
So yeah, I was fascinated by Phil's point around the sort of big spaces and the journeys colleges have been through, in particular around a library to a learning resource centre to, is it open plan, is it classrooms? Sort of what you're describing really is just an environment that people can go, be comfortable in a sort of a learning environment in a sense, and then pursue whatever it is that they want to be pursuing with support around if necessary, which means, you know, the government's capital programme for the next couple of years maybe should be for knocking down walls and putting in a few more cable sockets or something. There was a comment, actually it was a quick Q&A from an anonymous who's clearly scared of Ofsted because it's quoting Amanda Spielman, talking about Amanda saying face-to-face is the gold standard and remote is second rate. And I'm not sure quite how she said it, but I think she did say face-to-face is the gold standard. Interested in your views on that, but also you can have face-to-face online. I mean, this is one of the things, isn't it? When people talk about what online learning is and what sort of face-to-face is, there's actually a bit of confusion about what each of them is. So, and Lester, starting with you, do you have any thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, no, I do, Mark, because actually, I personally, I think the word remote is possibly the wrong choice of word anyway, because remote does indicate isolation, a loneliness, and it doesn't really conjure up much of an exciting environment to be learning in. I think when we talk about online learning, we talk about facilitated online learning. So, you know, even if it's not a live person, it might be a chat bot, or it could be some sort of virtual assistant that's there to help and guide the person through the learning journey that they're going on. So I think that, you know, that terminology remote is something I would personally try to avoid myself. Also, I think when we talk about the whole experience for the learner, you know, it is about the enrichment that they can go on to if they want to whilst they're doing online, whether that's online learning in a physical classroom as well, because that can still obviously clearly happen as well. And it's how they're encouraged to go in and look any deeper at the learning and the pedagogy that they're looking at and the structure that they're looking at. So I think to me, it's more about how inquisitive and how inquiring you make that learning, however you deliver it. And I think you could deliver it just as easily in most cases through some sort of technological way.
Peter, do you have any thoughts around this?
Yeah, I think when you look at online learning or distance learning, you don't need to lose the human interaction. You can still have that. I think if we look at Stoke, there's some real challenges, but there's some real collaboration as well. We've got Jonathan Gullis, the local MP, the LEP, universities, other colleges, the local council have come together to have a silicon board and a digital board. We certainly see this as being the future. We're working together to drive it, and we've got some real outputs. The council has just laid over 100 kilometres of high-speed internet cable in and around the Stoke area. There's a real realisation that this is the future. But I think that sometimes there's a misconception of what online learning is. It isn't, for me, a one fit for all. It can be tailored, it can be personalised, and it can include human interaction. So for me, as we've already touched upon, it is the future. It will be embedded in certain colleges more quickly than others. But at the end of the day, if we're doing what our learners need, then for me, there's no issue in it moving forward. It needs to be balanced, but I think that we can work both with face-to-face and online learning just as effectively. So,
you know, I've got 3 teenage kids. They spend most of their life talking to their friends online. You know, that's where they talk and interact. They talk to each other rather than going out the bedrooms. They talk to each other online rather than stand up and move. And they, you know, and then they talk to Americans and others as well. So, you know, we're all sitting here. I was just trying to scribble down Selby, Leeds, London, Suffolk, Stoke, and the South Coast. I'm guessing Leicester is, yeah. The fact that we've been able to just within minutes click on and all be together, there's clearly benefits of that. I certainly know James, his expense claims have gone through the floor since he hasn't been traveling around the country every day. So, you know, there are massive benefits to that, and it is the way that a lot of, you know, the younger generations, shall we say, are interacting more and more anyway. And Chris, I'll come to you after, James. Chris, again, that you talked about some of the cognitive things. Do you lose something by this form of interacting rather than others? And is there a danger of it almost doing damage? I mean, do you have any thoughts or views on that?
Yes, yeah, I think in an ideal world, you want to stimulate the brain with as many different inputs as possible in order to get the information through. And if you just putting information in the brain through one specific domain, then you're limiting that brain's ability to create interconnections and networks. And ultimately that limits its ability to recall that information at a later point for use. So it is important that if someone's trying to learn, that we do it with maybe text, we do it with speech, we do it with engagement, we make them go away and rehearse something. And the more that we can undertake just different approaches, the better. So we've been talking about blended here. Blended's really, really strong, I feel, and that'll be one sort of significant outcome from this.
Okay, so James, you wanted to chip in with something?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to go back to that comment around the gold standard being face-to-face, and I know we're putting that in the context of apprenticeship provision, but just I think it's a really important point to highlight. I absolutely disagree with that, and we've talked about digital poverty and people not having access to learning, but what about those who do have access to learning and actually the classroom isn't for them? I think that's a really important case of some people actually have hugely benefited from independent training providers and colleges extending their provision online. Perhaps they wouldn't have actually walked in the physical infrastructure of the building, and all of a sudden the options available to them across the country, they can now learn at home. And I know from a skills network training provider point of view, a significant number of our learners actually learn online to get the confidence to perhaps go back. So I disagree with that comment, and there's two ways to look at that in terms of people might have the access and do want it, and it offers that flexibility.
Yeah, I think we're just going to have to go back and double check the context of that quote, but I remember her saying it as well, and I was shocked for coming from what is normally very balanced viewpoints. I'm sure there was balance in there somewhere. Phil, one of the questions I was going to ask, but I think the blended themes come through quite positively, because it goes back to this: is blended the best or the worst of both worlds? You know, because there's a danger that you create this almost mess of stuff rather than it's just clearly one thing or the other. You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there is that option of it could be messy, but actually if you're precise on your coordination, on your setup, and you're clear from day one the information that you give, the way in which you're communicating through different forms, so email and text, and ensuring that you get those learners in the right place and do the right thing, then you can't sort of mess up from that point. I think the blended is certainly here to stay, something that we're continuing on with. What we're also looking at is the added value. So there is so much more within an apprenticeship that we can add now on top, because the resources available to us. So, you know, working with you guys close at Skills Network, there's so much additional CPD units we could add in. There's so many more that actually, if that learner was looking to head in a management position and they're not studying management, actually we can start them on that process. So it's something more that we're looking to do. So the stretch and challenge part, really, really key. You know, not only get through your qualification and what you want to study and skills you want to develop quickly, but add these extra things on as well, because they will be useful for you in the future.
Lester, did you want to come in there? And then...
Yeah, one thing I would just add as well, bearing in mind, we're talking a lot about the technology for the learning, but equally the technology gives us a lot of analytical information behind the scenes. And certainly what we're starting to use is using some of those analytics to see where learners are struggling or what parts of the curriculum they're finding easier to undertake at various stages, and then use that to inform our curriculum planning as well. So you've got a wealth of knowledge behind the scenes, under the bonnet, as it were, to help you plan as well. So I think that's important.
Chris, and I'm sure you'll want to comment on data as well.
Yeah, I was just about to say that Trump's campaign during the election changed the outcome of that election using only Facebook and some data analytics, allegedly. I should probably back myself if I said allegedly. And none of that was delivered face to face. So just to say that's a gold standard when you can change the outcome of election using just digital delivery, I think there's a significant proof point there.
Yeah, and I mean, the data for me, again, having run a college and really not known what's been going on in my classrooms day to day, you know, you rely on a management structure, you rely on sort of samples, you rely on results, whereas if you can sit in an organization and literally bring up every student, every tutor, every unit of learning, and either individually or collectively see how they're performing, that's a phenomenal, a powerful set of data to make decisions and help guide the learning. Or, you know, if a tutor's sort of not working right, or a unit of learning is not working right, or a group of students are, you can see it all immediately with the right reporting tools. And it's fantastic just being able to press a button and see all of that stuff. So that data and the ability to report is incredibly powerful, isn't it? And I think that's, Phil, did you want to say something there?
Yeah, that data set you're right, so vitally important. It's how, if you look at it in the flip side of how we are marketed to, just in our personal lives, people collect information on us, on our preferences. Actually, that can work exactly the same way in learning. So where are you, where are you showing your progression to, or where you're really doing really well, or where you're not doing so well? Actually, that can be targeted that way. So the collection of data on systems and how you then use that is the real key. And you're right, within the FE sector, we've struggled with that for a number of years. We're gradually getting better at that, and we need to have that top down. Where is everybody? Is everyone getting through to the point where we need them to? So data is the king.
James, did you want to say something? Because I mean, I'm sure you talk a lot about the reporting power of an online system and all of that.
Yeah, I think it's therefore about having the right system and the right technology. There's a lot of learning technology around where you can't get access to that data. And I think that's where everybody, again, has got to utilise the expertise in the marketplace to ensure that they embed the right form of technology for the right reporting. It's fundamental in provision, and if you're running a regulated qualification, that people get access to that data. There's a lot of kind of open source software around that probably doesn't actually hit the mark when you're looking at the style of provision that you're trying to get. So Skills Network is all about, and there's lots of other systems, is really the power of the reporting and the analytics that you've got in front of you to look at the students and what they need, and we go back to the stretch and challenge of the students and how they interact.
Okay, so we're hitting our final 10 minutes. It seemed like 2 with all of you here today. I've got one sort of final question, and then also I'll go around, and if there are any final bits you want to throw in as well, because this digital poverty thing does keep coming up, and I know it is a real concern, and it's very easy to forget the challenges of many. But I'll go back to that head teacher who was describing the environment, because actually she said she worked in a very, very deprived area. She said, all my kids have phones though. They've all got phones. So is part of the problem that actually a lot of what's designed for online delivery is not mobile friendly. And even though it may horrify some of us to think of doing all your learning on a mobile, actually that's a major part of shifting this issue around poverty, because it's looking for the things that people have most access to. And again, I know there are issues around the phone companies allowing data and all of that, but that will change as well. So any thoughts on that, or any final comments? Lester, start with you.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think in part it's also to do, we have a responsibility in terms of thinking about the content and what we're putting across and how that's consumed. You know, we know that there is some very rich media content which can use up a lot of bandwidth and take up a lot of unnecessary resources in terms of the technology world that sometimes isn't needed. So when we think about, you know, perhaps people being able to afford maybe a much cheaper version of a piece of kit to get online with, if it does what it needs to do, then we need to be thinking about that. Do we need things in 4K, high definition, super definition, you know, to just to get a learning point across? I think that's one of the things we need to think about. I think, and I suppose for me, a final parting comment for me would be that absolutely, I think that, you know, the online, the blended, everything that we've spoken about today is only going to go into the future, and I'm looking forward to seeing Einstein in that classroom that Chris spoke about. I'll come back in 10 years and see if that's really happened. But I think it is an exciting journey. I think there's also going to be a blend of work as well. When Phil talked about the communities of learning, you know, don't forget work. The environment of work has changed for many people as well at home now. So maybe we're going to see a blended work learning sort of community environment, and that could be the future as well.
Okay, thank you, Lester. Phil, Pete, rather.
I think that access to learning is key, and I think that we've got to work collaboratively to make sure that people do have that access. And I've already touched upon in Stoke the great work that's been done in terms of collaboration between the LEP, the local authority, MPs, colleges, universities, and I think there needs to be more of that. I've already touched upon my view that there needs to be more what I call community learning, and I still think very strongly that we can do that even with online learning. The people that we learn with are often great sources if we're struggling or we have questions. We don't always want to focus those questions in terms of the tutor or the lecturer or the assessor. So we need to know who our respective learners are in those digital classrooms, and I think that there needs to be a piece of work around that. And also what we haven't touched upon to a degree is the National Skills Fund. The government is ploughing in many millions of pounds to try and upskill to level 3 qualifications people within the general population. And I think that individuals now, time is of the essence. So I think that for those people that are accessing that learning moving forward, they'll want that flexibility of digital learning, the ability to stop and start through the day, through the evenings when they want to. And I think that that flexibility will open up new areas both for colleges and individuals to access learning.
Okay, thank you. James.
Yeah, I think the guys have probably covered the access thing off, which is obviously a key critical point. So for me, just as a closing point, as the time ticks down, that learning technology for me is a wonderful, powerful tool, and it's proven over the last 12 months that it can help to innovate. And we've all talked about that benchmark of quality. So taking world-class teaching and giving it to the ability of everyone. So there were quite a few barriers previously to 12 months ago where people had to kind of react. And I think it's really important as the education community that those barriers don't start to slip back up as people go back into kind of a normal environment. And I think that's got to be just across the board for everyone, that learning technology and the way in which everyone learns is goes in and is embedded as part of the future. And I'm sure the fact that we're on one of the main debates today at the AAC, that hopefully will remain. Okay,
thanks, James. Chris.
Echoing some of James's points, but there's 4 things that have come out of this one for me, really. So the first one is around data. I absolutely, totally believe data is going to be so important going forwards, and we should all do what we can to move anything paper-based onto digital, because we're going to need to acquire and learn from that data. And that means that organizations need to be really digitally mature and start embedding those digital infrastructures into themselves as soon as possible, because this is a consistent journey. We're not going to become less digital. Third one here is that externally produced real high level quality content is going to be very important for organizations and the platforms within which to run that content on, because they'll get to focus more on the actual high quality of education and teaching that learner rather than just passing information to them. Mm-hmm. And finally, interesting one that I hadn't really thought too much about, but I think Phil was talking about quite a bit, which is how are we going to repurpose existing learning properties around the country, because we'll be using them in a very, very different way.
Okay, so that's a handy pass through to you, Phil, and your new learning property.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I'd like personally to see the big mobile companies and networks give access free of charge to under 18s between the hours of 9 and 3. This would give the whole, UK something to really tangible to access and to help and support. And if government can, interact and support that, actually the footprint will be for the future and how we are future-proofing our country. So I'd like to see that as one. Certainly the remote, the learning in a community base of our properties we need to look at, and how we're going to structure those certainly in the years to come. And also we can't forget the social skills. So digital learning is fantastic. We must continue to come together to learn social skills. That's from me.
Okay, thanks, Phil, and thanks everyone. We've had dongles, we've had Xboxes in the chat as well. It does feel like maybe we should be getting FE Week to do a bit of a campaign around free mobile access from 9 to 3, and maybe get Marcus Rashford or someone similar. I'm sure one of them is sponsored by a big mobile company, aren't they? That'd be a start. But it is, digital poverty is clearly an issue, and it's a growing issue, and it will become even more important, as we've talked about. So we'll take that as an action for the organisers of this conference, because I'm sure they've made 1 or 2 pennies out of this. They can help us with a bit of a campaign. Thank you all really much. In a way, there's too much to summarise, and you've all done a great job in picking up some of the key points. I don't think anyone thinks the tap's going to be turned off now. It's more about what works for which types of learners and how we deliver it, but also making sure that we keep looking at the technology and how that technology works to deal with some of the problems that you've talked about, so that it is possible through technology to deliver this stuff. The real biggie for me is that I just think technology releases time and resource, whether it's the teacher, the management, everyone else, so that you can add more to the experience. I think someone said early on, it's not about saving money, it's about freeing up money and resource to add more to what you're doing. And that always with technology, people think, oh, it will save us money. It's not about that. It's improving quality, improving volume, improving access. So thank you all. Really, it's been really, really good debate this afternoon. I'm sure it will keep going on and on and on as technology develops and education develops. And thank you to everyone that was listening. It's very weird for us. We don't know whether there are 2 of you or 200, but hope there are 200, and hope you'll spread that out. Thanks everyone, and bye.